千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Let us begin. Now, I would like to extend a warm welcome. Thank you for joining us. Please center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. Now, without further ado, let us get started with Tao Te Ching 31. The title of chapter 31 is Value the Left. This title is taken from the chapter. The line talks about the honorable individuals valuing the left. They value the left side because in ancient China, it represented life, compassion, and peace. In traditional rituals since ancient times, the person conducting the ritual would use the left hand to light the candle or the lamp. The right side in ancient China represented death, violence, and warfare. Together, the left and right form a complementary duality, a manifestation of yin and yang. We will delve into the significance of this very specific symbology further in our discussion. In the context of this chapter, to value the left simply means to emphasize and cherish the positive qualities in life. In the Tao, to go with the flow specifically means moving alongside the Tao, moving forward in a direction that is life-affirming, non-contentious, and nurturing for all. And here is Tao Te Ching 31. A strong military, a tool of misfortune. All things detested. Therefore, those who possess the Tao avoid it. Honorable gentlemen, while at home, value the left. When deploying the military, value the right. The military is a tool of misfortune, not the tool of honorable gentlemen. When using it out of necessity, calm detachment should be above all. Victorious, but without glory. Those who glorify are delighted in the killing. Those who delight in killing cannot achieve their ambitions upon the world. Auspicious events favor the left. Inauspicious events favor the right. The lieutenant general is positioned to the left. The major general is positioned to the right. we say that they are treated as if in a funeral. Those who have been killed should be mourned with sadness. Victory in war should be treated as a funeral. That was Tao Te Ching 31. Next, we'll look for repeating patterns in the original characters to see how the text is divided into sections. For this particular chapter, I find that the best way to handle it is to start from the bottom. Take a look, for instance, toward the bottom and see how in line 15 and 16, you can see how the second and third characters repeat. And there's similar pattern for 17 and 18. Let me go ahead and highlight them in red to make them easier to see. And there is another pattern among these four lines that we can see, that is left, right, left, right. So starting with 15 and 16, the ending characters, and you can see the translation to the right side, the English. You've got the left and the right. If you look further down at 17 and 18, you see the same two characters translated the same way. So from 15 down to 18, we see the pattern repeating itself in that very specific way. For us, this reveals that there's a section divide in between line 14 and 15. And because the repeating patterns do no longer repeat themselves below line 18, we can also see that there's another division mark between 18 and 19. For us, this reveals the last two sections of this chapter. And in the last chapter, we can see more repeating patterns. The bottom four lines are the concluding section. And if you look at line 19 and line 22, we have 5 characters in common. Let me mark them in red to make them easier to see. So we have now established the last two sections of this chapter. What about the first half? This translation is faithful to the original, so repeating expressions in the original text will be translated as the equivalent English expressions that also repeat. Here's what I mean by that. At the end of line 1, the English translation says, a tool of misfortune. If you look further down in line 6, we see the same translation in English, a tool of misfortune. Looking to the left at the original text from ancient times, we see that indeed they're mostly the same characters, as you can see by the red highlights. So Lao Tzu begins this chapter by calling the military exactly that, a tool of misfortune. Because warfare, after all, is the greatest cause of human misery and suffering. So he provides his initial remarks from line 1 to line 5, associating the military with the right side, symbolizing, as I mentioned, death, destruction, violence, warfare. Then he repeats the assertion in line 6. From line 6 to line 14, Lao Tzu makes additional remarks that get into exactly why it should never be used except as a last resort. So based on this, we can see there must be a dividing line between line 5 and 6. And this identifies our first 2 sections of this chapter. So we can see by this way of dividing that there are 4 sections total. One can also talk about how between line 9 and line 10, there's a subdivision, but we can regard line 6 to line 14 as section 2. So in the first section, we definitely do see the pattern in lines 4 and 5. They are once again talking about the left and right. And then we can also see down in 12 and 13, there are repeating characters, 3 characters that repeat themselves. Let me go ahead and highlight those as well, as you can see. And just a moment ago, I mentioned that lines 4 and 5 also have to do with the ancient Chinese cultural symbology of left and right. So let me circle those to make them easier to see as well. So here's the left in line 4, specifically, value the left. Then, this is followed by value the right. So, looking at the overall sense of the progression of this chapter, from this first introductory section, Lao Tzu goes into the second section, elaborating on why the military is such a detriment to humanity. The third section, from 15 to 18, Lao Tzu clarifies left and right even further with a couple of examples. The last section there, the final section, is where Lao Tzu drives home his overall point. War should be equated to a funeral. It is the cause of mourning and sadness. There is nothing glorious about it. And now we are ready to get into the meaning of this chapter, starting with the first line. Line 1 says, a strong military, a tool of misfortune. So here is a clear expression from Lao Tzu about his opposition to violent force. This opposition is consistent with all the Tao sages from antiquity to today. This line continues the train of thought from the previous chapter about the negative consequences of warfare. We can understand where Lao Tzu is coming from just by realizing that in his time, there were massive armies engaged in huge battles. So his thoughts about warfare were based not on theory, but actual experience. Because for him, death and violence of war, these were the facts of life. Now, one might argue that if the military is a tool could be used for good or bad, depending on the hand that held or wielded the tool. Lao Tzu specifically says a tool of misfortune. At the kingdom level, it is an army of soldiers. It is the weapons of war. Such a tool will be specifically designed and created for the purpose of threatening, injuring, or killing other people, the people of other kingdoms. And that's why it is such a negative thing. For us, not ancient times, but modern times, this maps to the Tao of non-contention in our everyday lives. And therefore, we should also regard a deadly weapon as just that, what Lao Tzu says, a tool of misfortune. And notice how usually deadly weapons in our world are oftentimes regarded as a symbol of power. The Tao perspective is quite different. Now, we're talking about the Tao here, and Lao Tzu clearly is voicing his opposition. He's saying that violence, the use of force, weapons that kill or maim the army, these are bad things. Sometimes in the West, we hear people say there is no good or bad in the Tao. Well, that isn't actually what the sages taught. So let me clarify. What the sages actually taught was that the great Tao encompasses all, the good as well as the bad. So it isn't so much that there is no good and bad in the Tao, there is everything in the Tao, the good as well as the bad. What we think about as good or bad is strictly from the human perspective. And since we're humans, it is our only perspective. As we navigate our lives, we're faced with good and bad choices at every turn. Sometimes it is not so clear what they are. Is a choice I'm about to make a good choice, or is it a bad choice? I'm not sure. The authentic teaching is that we can be guided by the Tao to choose wisely. Choosing wisely means we can benefit ourselves and others. So, when we hear something like there's no good or bad in the Tao, here in the West, the distorted teaching is actually denying the reality that in our lives, there exist good choices and bad choices, even though we may not know what they are at first. There has always been and continues to be distortions. That is the nature of living life. This line from Lao Tzu tells us the distortion is actually nothing more than a misconception. I am happy we have the opportunity to clear this up. And as I said, good and bad are always tied to the human experience, because we must all continue to live in this mortal existence. So everything can be evaluated based on how it affects human survival and civilization flourishing. This is not the only chapter in the Tao Te Ching to talk about this. This chapter is just one of many about the Tao being against violence and warfare. So we will talk more about the other chapters that echo the sentiment. First, let's go to line 2. Line 2 says, all things detested. Let's talk about what this means. When we say detested, we're talking about the tool of misfortune, the strong military. When we talk about all things, that is the first character denoting all living things. All living things include the living creatures, the myriad things, as well as human beings who are also living things. It is clear that deaths, injuries, and trauma have an extreme effect on people, on us. And warfare does not just affect humans. It also destroys the environment and thereby affecting the myriad things. So there's plenty of justification to think that all are opposed or repulsed by violence. And the specific character is the third character in this line. It is a character that means a strong dislike, a revulsion, an aversion, a loathing. So this is a strong statement from Lao Tzu. We can see from here that there are definitely negative emotions in the Tao. What it means is that we have to take a stand against all that is harmful to humanity. There are confirmations and echoes of this idea throughout history, because when we look at history, we see that there have always been those who were out to conquer. And things never ended well for them. As an example, Alexander the Great died young at the age of 32. Many of us in this meeting are well beyond that age. Although he was called the Great, dying at the age of 32 is not such a great thing. There's Napoleon, who ended his military career defeated and exiled. He died in isolation and bitterness. Closer to our time is Hitler, who was defeated by the Allies. He died by suicide. And further back from our time, the conqueror Genghis Khan, he died in his military campaign. He lived by violence, and so he died by violence. That's history. What about our lives? Well, we know that there have always been bullies who seek to dominate. They follow a similar pattern. They are detested by all. So this is the reality of the authentic Tao. It opposes violence, killing. It opposes causing harm to others. Some may say there is no hatred in the Tao. But let me offer that is also a distortion, as we can see here. Right in front of us, there is a character meaning revulsion, aversion, loathing. So, let's go to the Tao and war, because, as I mentioned, this chapter is not the only one that talks about this important issue. In the previous chapter, Tao Te Ching 30, right before this one, Lao Tzu wrote, "Following the great army, there must be an inauspicious year." He was describing how there must be a bad year after a great army has passed through. As this chapter says, the military is something that brings misfortune. So these two statements, one from chapter 30, one from chapter 31, they reinforce each other. The inauspicious year is simply the time of great suffering that comes after a battle. People have no choice. Suffering the aftermath of the great battle, they are left to pick up the pieces. So it isn't just the chapter before this one. There are chapters after this one in the Tao Te Ching that also emphasize the goodness of peace and the negativity of war. There's Tao Te Ching 46, where Lao Tzu says, "When the world lacks the Tao, war horses give birth on the battlefield." So this is Lao Tzu using the imagery, a vivid image of a mare giving birth on the battlefield as a striking way to evoke the misery and suffering of war. The newborn foal emerges into life, surrounded by nothing but death and suffering. Then there's chapter 69. These are just 3 examples out of many. In 69, Lao Tzu says, "In using the military, there is a saying, I dare not be the host, but prefer to be the guest. I dare not advance an inch, but prefer to withdraw a foot." This is highlighting the importance of stepping back from conflict rather than to charge ahead and attacking blindly. Again, this is counter to the glorification of violence and warfare. Just by these 3 examples, we can see that there are echoes throughout the Tao Te Ching of the lines that we are studying. A strong military, a tool of misfortune, all things detested. So this is a very emphatic statement. There's no wriggle room here. The Tao is opposed to all of that. Next line. Line 3 says, therefore, those who possess the Tao avoid it. Avoiding, in this case, the military, the tool of misfortune. So let me start by breaking down the 3 characters that you see highlighted in red. 有道者. Literally, the first character means to have or to possess. The second character there, which is the third character in the line, that is the character for the Tao. You can see it is the same character on the upper right corner of the slide. Then, the final character there, which is the third character in our focus, but the fourth character in the line, it means those who. And when you put it all together, it is those who possess the Tao. So, who are the ones that possess the Tao? These are the people who just get it about the Tao. I hope that includes all of us in this conversation. These are the ones who understand the importance of the Tao in life. And therefore, they seek out more of it. So, all of them, all of us, possess the Tao at varying degrees, varying levels, from beginners to a very high degree of spiritual refinement. But even those who only know the basics can possess the Tao if they apply what they know. And they apply it consistently, living their lives in a practical way over the long term. So we can see the defining characteristics of those who possess the Tao, such as they are not warlike because they know force leads to misfortune. They are compassionate toward all because enemies are people too. So when I say all, I mean that literally. All human beings, regardless of the side in battle that they take. Those who possess the Tao do not celebrate winning because they know the cost of victory all too well. And they will not move against the Tao. They know violence begets violence. Moving against the Tao is the wrong thing to do, but also whatever you project outward will return back to you. So it is in their best interest, those who have the Tao, to not get into violence in the first place. Continuing on with this line, we now focus on the last 2 characters. So the literal meaning of the last 2 characters, we have a character for no or not or none. And then the last character there is the character for place. To place, to be in, to dwell. So, what does it mean? Those with the Tao do not place themselves in a conflict situation. They walk away from it, but this does not mean running away from conflict. This is not the same as what people often call to cut and run. They avoid contention instead in a way that is proactive. When they are in the middle of conflict, those with the Tao will try to understand the situation because clarity can diffuse tension. What if the conflict originated from a misunderstanding? Clarity can help you with that. When they're in contention already, they work on diplomatic solutions to get out of it. And before contention begins, same thing. They work on diplomatic solutions to prevent the escalation from tension to contention. So, we're now ready to look at the line in totality, which again says, therefore, those who possess the Tao avoid it. Avoid the military, violence, the use of force, etc. Those with the Tao understand the extreme negativity of violence. They know the use of force is always contrary to life and well-being. No exception. They know any harm done to others is also done to oneself. This is because we are all one at a fundamental level. An action that harms others will eventually be revealed as something that harms oneself in some way. To see this, we only have to look at the accounts of soldiers who killed in battle that become traumatized for life. And this is because they cannot unsee the atrocities that they witnessed in battle or atrocities they committed themselves. What this tells us is that no matter how wars or violence or use of force, no matter how they are justified, no matter how necessary they may be, one has to always be mindful of the cost involved. So I'm referring to violence and the use of force at any scale. Military action at the national scope, conflicts and clashes at the personal level. It's all part of it. So, those with the Tao choose to put some distance between themselves and contention. That is what the last two characters mean. And those with the Tao seek peaceful resolution whenever possible. This is a core concept of the Tao that we can apply to life. When we back away from conflict or a potential fight, it gives you a better perspective. A perspective like, look, does getting into a fight really make sense? And sometimes a momentary pause is all it takes to let cooler heads prevail. So let's take a look at more examples from the lives that we lead. Applying the Tao. I find this to be very important because at the surface level, this chapter seems to be about advising ancient rulers against using their military might. But in reality, what Lao Tzu has done is using metaphoric language that is meant to apply to everyone, including us. When we apply the Tao, we can roughly see it in terms of our personal interactions as well as what happens in our professional lives. Starting with the personal. This is wisdom in dealing with others. And this can include everyone in your sphere of influence, including your family, your friends, the people you know, your associates and acquaintances. So the first thing is that knowing how arguing brings misfortune. No denying it, arguments are a source of misfortune, just as aggression of the military is a tool of misfortune. And another part of the wisdom is to not force your opinions onto other people. This is equivalent to adopting a warlike posture, being very aggressive and domineering. The third part of the wisdom is to listen without rushing into a debate. To rush into a debate is the equivalent of charging into battle. And lastly, at the personal level, we must have the awareness that stubbornness is widely disliked. Being unreasonably stubborn is disliked by just about everyone. In a similar way as all things detesting the violence of military force. So, what we can learn from this is that when we have disagreement in our lives, instead of coming up with a rebuttal right away, why not try saying something like, "Listen, I understand what you mean. Let me think about it." That alone can do wonders to correct the course and introduce greater harmony. It is not showing weakness. You are just avoiding getting yourself dragged into battle by the strong military in your mind. Another part of life is what happens in a professional setting. There can be harmony in that setting, and this is wisdom in the workplace. So, starting with, let your work speak for itself. When you finish a project, let it speak. It can fend for itself. There is no need for you to glorify the win. The second part is to stay humble upon achieving success. Finishing a project, that can be a success. Doing a job well, that can be seen as having succeeded. Staying humble, not becoming arrogant, by being mindful of those who supported you. None of us exist or work alone. We need others to support us in our endeavors. The flip side of this, stay calm upon encountering failure. Failures are just a part of life. They represent lessons that are valuable learning opportunities. Therefore, when you fail, there's no need to wallow in frustration. There will be other opportunities for you to prove yourself. And lastly, do not let yourself be defined by title, position, or the judgment of other people. Do not let yourself be limited by them. This is just like saying that you can play a role whether you are a foot soldier, the company commander, or the general. So, putting this into examples, at the workplace, when you've been promoted, I would suggest maintaining your humble mindset by treating others in the same approachable way as before. Your promotion should not change you as a person. Instead, it should reveal more of you as the person that you truly are. And the flip side of this, when you've been misunderstood, I would suggest maintaining your composure. Your Tao remains constant regardless of what people may think. Let the truth emerge in its own good time. All of this together give us an extra level of context into this ancient line. Those who possess the Tao avoid it. In our modern lives, it turns out we have quite a few ways to avoid contention and conflict. Line 4, it says, honorable gentlemen, while at home, value the left. So the first thing we should look at is the first two characters, 君子. Here's the pinyin pronunciation for that. This term has previously been translated by other people as Confucian gentleman. This is actually not a good translation at all, because the term appeared in history long before Confucius. It predated Confucius by many centuries, originating in the Zhou dynasty, well before the Warring Stage period or the Spring and Autumn period. This term is gender neutral. However, by traditional customary default, it is usually assumed to be male, reflecting the emphasis in ancient times on that role. And that's why it is translated in the male form as honorable gentleman. But keep in mind, the term is actually more like person. It's gender neutral. And for the purpose of our study of the Tao Te Ching, we will always assume gender neutrality. The term applies to honorable people of any gender. Originally, this term denoted a person of noble lineage, the prince, the son of a king the son of a duke, etc. This is similar to ancient Europe, medieval Europe, where it was assumed that someone from a noble lineage must be a better person than a commoner. And the same assumption is also true in ancient China. So, linguistically, in both East and West, this term evolved to denote a person of noble character instead of noble lineage. Therefore, someone from any background can be seen as having nobility in terms of having integrity, a solid, trustworthy character. Somebody who will always do the right thing. Someone who has a virtuous nature. So here's the bullet point to emphasize that it's gender neutral, defaults to the male in traditional usage. But keep in mind, for us, it is always going to be gender neutral. So looking at the entire line, honorable gentlemen, while at home, value the left. This honorable person values the positive aspects represented by the left. And let me explain what that representation is. The left side is associated with the east, the direction of sunrise. So, the most important thing to note here, especially in the West, is to know that East and West here would not be in any way related to or connected with modern distinctions about political alignment. It's completely different in ancient China. And when we talk about east, the direction, it is from the perspective of the ruler who faces south. So the direction of sunrise, overall, it represents the yang side of the yin and yang duality. This is because left and right was firmly rooted in the philosophy of yin and yang. The left is yang. It is east in direction. It is spring in season. It is the civil aspects of society. So for life, it represents auspicious beginning and growth. When the sun is rising, it is the beginning of the day. In terms of virtues, it represents compassion and kindness. It is auspicious. It is the position of honor for celebrations, births, and weddings. At home, it represents nurturing protection and peace. This is the growth aspect, the beginning of things, the nurturing of life. So let's talk about the right. The right is linked to the military due to its associations. That is why this line says, when deploying the military, value the right. The line makes more sense when you know the original symbology. So we talked about how the left is associated with the east in terms of direction. We can then make a reasonable guess that the right side must be associated with west, which is the direction of sunset. And if we say that the left represents the yang, part of the yin and yang duality, then we can also guess that the right must represent the yin side of the yin and yang duality. And instead of representing life, it would represent death. So this is why it is inauspicious. It is the position for funerals, the position for mourning. Instead of beginning, you represent ending. And this is why it has another connection to the military because of destruction. It's the end of things, the conclusion. For the military, it represents the use of force. So the military commanders and the instruments of war are placed here because their function is to end life. So valuing the right means valuing the skills and the capacity for violence. So let me also spend a moment to talk about how this is very different from Western culture. I have just mentioned that here, left and right have nothing to do with modern politics. Now, if we take a longer view, a larger perspective in examining Western traditions, we also see, even before modern politics in the West, left and right carried different connotations. The word right also carries the meaning of correct. It also means an entitlement, like I have the right to pursue liberty and happiness, etc. Having a right. All of the meanings of the word right are positive. This is not an accident. In Latin, right is dexter, which is associated with the English words for being skillful, having a skill, dexterity. Dexterous. These are all positive words. And we talk about being the right hand, being at the right side of God, being at the right side of an issue. These are all positive expressions. What about left? The left side doesn't have the positive connotations in Western traditions. It is the past tense of leave. That may be a coincidence, but in the original Latin, what is not coincidental is that the Latin word for left is sinister instead of dexter. Sinister is a contemporary English word associated with evil or wickedness. Therefore, the connotation of left is negative. So these, again, have little to nothing to do with the context in ancient China. Keep that in mind. A different cultural context, as you can see, will create completely different and opposite meaning for the same thing. Moving on, lines 4 and 5, consider together. They say, honorable gentlemen, while at home, value the left. When deploying the military, value the right. So, as I mentioned, the distinction of left and right is deeply rooted in ancient Chinese culture. In modern times, there are still traces of this ancient concept. It shows up in several different ways. Left and right in modern Chinese culture doesn't have the same emphasis that it did in ancient times. But we can still see the influence. For instance, in rituals, lighting the candle, placing the incense with the left hand. Traditional rituals, if they are authentic, will specify actions that must be done with the left hand, and never with the right, because of the ancient cultural associations. In terms of attire, in ancient times, the influence of the Tao was felt far and wide beyond the boundaries of ancient China. So, many of these concepts remain today in Japan, Korea, outlying regions. In wearing the kimono, one has to fold the left side over the right side. If you were to do it the opposite way, folding the right side over the left side, that is only done for the deceased. Why? Because the left side represents life. The right side represents death. Left over the right is for the living. The right over the left is for those who have died. I remember when I visited Japan, I stayed at a hotel that provided kimono for all its guests, including me. The tour guide told us repeatedly that we must be careful in how we wore the kimonos. If we folded the kimonos in the wrong way, we will get many strange stares from people. We will expose ourselves as people who were not actually understanding the ways of the traditional Japanese. Anyone unaware of this actual custom would inadvertently have a social faux pas while staying in Japan. And back to China, traditional greeting is left hand covering the right hand. This is the type of greeting you see in movies depicting ancient times, in martial arts, or among everyday people for Chinese New Year. The left palm, representing peace, covers the right fist, representing aggression. This conveys the message that you bring peace and you regard the importance of peace as surpassing contention or disharmony. So that's why it is so important culturally. Moving on to lines 6 and 7. The military is a tool of misfortune, not the tool of honorable gentlemen. So, in line 6, we have a partial reiteration of the first line. Why does it repeat? Because it is a signal to delve deeper into the topic. It is for emphasis that honorable people will regard the military not as a positive thing, but a very negative quantity. So, it is also important to see that this is referencing honorable individuals rather than those who have the Tao cultivators. This is because the principle Lao Tzu is talking about here, it applies to all who are conscientious, not just those who follow the Tao. So, Lao Tzu says this is not a tool of the honorable. An honorable individual would never consider force as a suitable tool. Having to use force at all would be the equivalent of admitting failure. So this ancient sentiment, I found an interesting correspondence from science fiction author Isaac Asimov. He wrote, "Violence is the last refuge of the incompetent." I think this is true in ancient times as well as a futuristic setting. Line 8. When using it out of necessity. So we have 3 characters here that I want to zoom in on. The first 3 characters translates to out of necessity, and let me comment on that. In the original Chinese text, the 3 characters are at the beginning of the line. When translated to English, they show up at the end of the line. And this is due to the difference in syntax of the 2 languages. This right here, out of necessity, it is actually an echo of what the previous chapter had already expressed. Let me bring back part of the previous chapter to show you where the repetition is. In line 13 of Tao Te Ching, chapter 30, you see the exact same 3 characters translated also as out of necessity. In a very literal sense, this expression means the situation is out of your hands, that literally it is not up to you. That's what the characters mean. You have no choice in the matter. And this is why Tao Te Ching 30 makes the same point. It is emphasized in 31, and what we can learn is that, yes, you can use force, but only if you have exhausted all other options. You can achieve results, but only with the minimal force necessary for the resolution. Nothing more than that. Now we can look at the entire line. When using it out of necessity. Again, we're talking about the military at the national level and violence at the personal level. I want to put that there as a reminder. So, from the Tao perspective, this usage of the military or violence, it must always be the last resort. It must never be the first option. So, under what circumstances would it be permitted? For instance, when you are engaged in self-defense, defending oneself upon being attacked, you have a duty to protect yourself and protect your ability to take effective actions. It is also necessary, it is also out of necessity to use force or violence when you have to defend others when they come under attack. So your priority in that particular case is to provide protection because you are acting from the courage of compassion. And create an opportunity to get away when trapped. Create an opening. When you are trapped, your priority is to somehow create an opening to put some distance between yourself and chaos. So overall, the sages understand this. In the Tao, the use of force is despised, loathed, hated, but not absolutely forbidden. Sometimes you simply have no choice. Things happen in life. The sages recognize that. And they further emphasize, all of these are valid when you are not the one to provoke other people. You are not the one to pick the fight. You are not the one who relishes conflict. And you are not the one who thinks defeating others brings some kind of honor. It does not. So these summarize the position that Lao Tzu wanted to express. We are now getting close to the top of the hour, so we should be taking a look at the summary slide to summarize what we have discussed today. The heading that you see here, the Tao perspective on conflicts, it is the same as the heading for Tao Te Ching 30. Why are they the same? Because this chapter is a continuation that delves deeper into the same message, the Tao opposing contention at any level. In this chapter, we started out with the military or the use of force. In ancient times, the use of the military was the rulers who waged war. We map that to our lives today, and it becomes our personal approach to violence in life. The most important thing to keep in mind here is that every line in this chapter, every character is meant for us today. It is not meant for ancient kings in generals, as it may appear at first. This chapter is very relevant. Then we get to left and right. This is the ancient Chinese symbology based on yin and yang that requires more explanation. As we have discussed, the left side represents life. The right side represents death. The more we learn about the meaning of left and right in ancient Chinese culture, the more we're able to understand the deeper meaning of this chapter. the more we can see how emphatic Lao Tzu is in expressing his strong opposition. Lastly, we have to talk about 君子, the noble person, the honorable individual who will never default to force as a tool. The honorable person who knows there's nothing good or glorious in using force, in using violence. So this is the key concept, 君子, the person of noble character. So even those who know nothing about the Tao, just by virtue of being alive, they are automatically in alignment with the life-affirming Tao. Therefore, everything we have talked about in this chapter applies to them, just as the Tao applies to us. For easy access to Tao resources, visit my website, dereklin.com. There, you can click on links and see everything listed, such as Taoism.net, information about the Tao and this meeting, our Facebook community, a place to discuss the Tao with fellow seekers, our YouTube channel, recordings of all our previous meetings, my Amazon author page, books and audiobooks for further exploration. You can go directly to this page at dereklin.com/links. When you see the benefits of the Tao in your life, share your experience through comments in Facebook and share these resources with friends who may also benefit. If you find my books or audiobooks helpful, please post your reviews on Amazon to guide others to the Tao. If you have connections to prisoners interested in the Tao, contact me through Derek Lin Books on Facebook, and I will send my books to them free of charge. This is the path that I am on, so I can say sharing the Tao has transformed my life in incredible ways. I would like to invite you to come along. Let us travel together on the path in the journey of life. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us all travel safely so we can meet again. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness. Thank you, everyone. We are done for today. Have a great week, and I will see you in the next meeting. Bye for now.